I think it's amazing. So let's begin. So hi everyone, and welcome to this third episode of Bridges Ocean Talks, parts of the Bridges Research Program. This gathering usually takes place on the second Tuesday of every month, but because of public holiday tomorrow in France, we have changed it for Monday. As a quick reminder, the Bridges program focuses on social ecosystem of fisheries, artisanal, coastal, and pelagic fishing, as well as aquaculture in the southwest of Indian Ocean region. We use this term of social ecosystem to describe an interconnected world in which human and societies and ecological environment interact with and influence one another. Through its work, the program aims to promote management tools and governance models that support biodiversity and a fair, sustainable fishery. Our goal here is to share knowledge and encourage exchanges within the world community of ocean stakeholders in the SWAIO. I would like to thank in advance Georgie Mbaz and Manuel Cabinda for providing live translation to this webinar, so giving the participants the chance to follow the talk in French, English, and Portuguese. As a quick reminder of good practices, please mute your microphone during the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and we will publish it later on the Bridges website and on YouTube. We will start by 30 minutes of presentation and then roughly 15 minutes of discussion. Feel free to note your question all along the presentation in the chat, and we will put them in order to the speaker at the end of the presentation. So today we are delighted to welcome Edward Eddie Allison, the principal scientist at the international research organization WorldFish. He's based in Malaysia. Eddie Allison research focuses on the connection between human and natural resources, including the contribution of fisheries and aquaculture to food and nutrition security in coastal habitats, the governance of small-scale fisheries and aquaculture and the human rights of fishers, and the vulnerability and adaptation to climate change of marine resource-dependent populations. Professor Eddie Allison has over 30 years of significant global influence in livelihood and food system, especially in fisheries and aquaculture. His work spans regions including Sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, Oceania, Latin America, and North America and Europe. In 2020, he was celebrated as one of the top 0.1% most mentioned researcher worldwide by Clarivate Web Science. And he also advises the high-level panel of sustainable ocean economy and is also a science advisor to a nonprofit Oceana. And within the Bridges frame, he is also a member of our International Scientific Committee. So today, Eddie will be talking to us about the food system, the island food system. Through Pacifique region and Timor-Leste example, Eddie will present the concept of island food system and explore how these insights can inform future work in the SWAIO and especially within the Bridges program. Eddie, the chair is yours. If you want to share your screen, I'll let you the floor. Yes, amazing. We see.
Thank you, Camille. I'm just checking is that full screen?
That's perfect.
And you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the introduction and for the opportunity to talk to you as part of this Bridges webinar series about island food systems. And I want to talk about the work that my colleagues and I do at WorldFish with a whole range of partners on island food systems. We have an office, World Fish, in Solomon Islands, and we have one in Timor-Leste. So I'm primarily going to focus on case studies from those two countries, although we also do regional and global analysis and policy work. So let me just trying to minimize. Whoops. Okay, the slide is not advancing this time. Let's see if we can do it.
I think you have yeah.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so what's special about island food systems? Well, they tend to have a number of shared characteristics. They share the characteristic of being land and water scarce. They're vulnerable to climate change and natural disasters often. And frequently they don't produce enough food domestically and have to rely on imports from elsewhere. And they're often ocean dominated, so aquatic foods play a central role. And they have relatively small populations and economies, and so distance and the scale affect how competitive they are in global trade. They also have often a history of colonialism as plantation economies, which has affected how the land has been used and what kind of agriculture they've had in the past. Nutrition trends are consistently poor, unfortunately, at the moment, and it's important for us to sort of dig into that and find out why and try and address it. And that's the motivation for much of this work. But many still have rich indigenous or locally adapted practices and foods, which could be revived and built upon. They also have many strengths socially, politically. There's a growing collective voice of small island developing states or large ocean states, as they prefer to call themselves. They've been very influential in some of the multilateral organizations, for example, in shaping the global climate change agenda. So there is hope that something similar could be achieved in food systems as well. So in order to understand island food systems, we have developed an island food systems framework. And this basically brings together the elements of the system in ways that you can understand how they interact and affect each other. So the light gray outside band in this diagram represents external biophysical drivers. Apologies, I'm not sure why they don't show on the graphic itself. But these are things like ocean temperature change, sea level rise, and ocean acidification. And these biophysical drivers combine with socioeconomic drivers to influence the food system. So socioeconomic drivers are things like migration and urbanization, demographic change, cultural and social change, social differentiation within and between communities and islands, and politics, livelihoods, infrastructure, gender relations, and the quality and nature of governance systems. And all of this impacts the ability to make successful and coherent food policies. And the food policies, in turn, shape all the components of the food system, from production through processing, distribution, and consumption. And we think about the food system in 4 components, encompassing this chain from production to consumption. And consumption takes place in what we call the food environment, which is the places where people consume food, purchase food, and make their decisions on what to eat. And that can be local markets, it can be supermarkets, it can be their own farms or their own fishing operations. Or it can be institutions such as the schools that you attend or the factories that you work at, where those institutions supply food. And all of that food system affects nutrition and health. So the outcomes of a food system can be assessed in terms of nutrition and health, the environmental impacts of that food system, the economic contributions it makes, and so on. So why should there be a specific island food system? How are islands different in their food systems from continents? Well, they face the particular challenges of biogeography and political and economic history that we introduced at the start. And also, most agronomic innovation and investment is designed to scale in large continental agroecosystems, like the rice-based systems of Asia and the maize-based systems of sub-Saharan Africa. You know, hundreds of thousands of millions of farms affecting billions of people with, you know, major cropping systems across large agroecological zones. And islands have these small populations and grow what, in a global terms, are minor crops, the roots and tubers, green leafy vegetables, and a whole range of marine products. And so most of those are excluded from agri-food research and investment in technological innovation. Aquatic foods are also more important usually to island populations than continental populations. And in generic food systems approaches, aquatic foods are often either completely forgotten or at the margins, whereas in an island food system, they're central. So mainstream models for sustainability transitions rely on these kind of economies of scale and on global market integration. So again, are poorly suited for food systems in situations where islands might be quite isolated or have only 2 or 3 strong connections to the outside world. So that's why a specific island food system approach. And so an example of some of the impacts of those drivers that we've seen in island food systems are the rapid transition that is taking place in the nature of those food systems. And if we look back to 1980 to 1990, during that period, there was a large fall in per capita domestic production on Pacific islands. And it's since sort of stagnated. And at the same time, a very rapid rise from the early 1990s, the sort of through 2015, the peak years of globalization, a rise in net food imports. And the thing is, as you see from these pictures, the domestic food production system, diverse products from coral reefs and open ocean and mangroves and intertidal areas, and diverse home gardens. Those systems, ways of providing food, are being replaced by imported foods that at first glance look diverse. They come in all kinds of different kinds of package, but they're essentially very similar goods, many of them ultra-processed, high in sugar, fat, and salt, and nutritionally much poorer than the food systems that they replace. And the result of this is that in the region, in the Pacific region, there is a nutrition and health crisis, really. Non-communicable disease, diet-related disease, is the leading cause of death in Pacific Islands. If you look at the first of these 3 panels, and each of these lines represents Melanesia, Micronesia, Polynesia, the trends are similar, the magnitude slightly different. But if you look at the first one, that's type 2 diabetes. And the time ranges here from 1990 to 2018. And in those 28 years, there has been almost a doubling of the incidence of diabetes in populations across the Pacific. And heart disease and stroke are both on the rise, associated with obesity and other diet-related problems. And this is due to that shift that we've seen away from domestic production and towards the consumption of ultra-processed and unhealthy imported foods. So the imperative is widely now shared that there should be a transformation in some ways back to traditional food systems, but recognizing that you can't go back to the past when everything else has also changed. So how do you innovate to take the best of traditional food systems, combine them with modern innovations and opportunities to create sustainable and healthy food systems in the future for small island states? And this schematic diagram here illustrates a process called socio-technical transitions. And at the center is the island food regime, which regimes are persistent states that determine the structure and outcome of a food system. So at the moment, the persistent global state of the food system is one of an agri-industrial food regime, intensive production, staple crops, processed foods, a certain amount of global integration. And this system globally is having negative health, livelihood, and environmental consequences. So it's not just on islands, but globally that there are many efforts to try to improve, to fix, to transform the current agri-food regime. And these transformations can take place when niche innovations, small-scale changes, that experiments that are tried, scale to alter the regime, to disrupt it. And it can also happen when external drivers like climate change and socioeconomic change can also force transformations. And so you can have transformations of this system which are planned and positive, driven by enlightened policies, or you can have them that are reactive and negative and driven by crisis. What we're hoping to achieve is a transformation that's deliberate and planned and is for the good of health, environment, and economy. So at WorldFish, and the consultative group on international agricultural research, of which we're a part, we've developed a research for development program in island food systems, which is about assessing island food systems and also building island food system resilience, putting ideas into practice. And so at island level, we're implementing for national impact across a range of multiple themes. And these are all illustrated here. I won't read them all. And I'm going to give examples of some of them, but not all of them in today's presentation, just for lack of time. And so some of these implementation could be around innovations in island food production systems, trying to increase or diversify production or make it more accessible to people, tackling food safety risks or improving fish handling and processing, analyzing international trade and policy, including fish and fish-based products in school meals, and so on. All of these kinds of interventions we've identified as entry points, niche innovations, if you like, that can help to transform the Pacific and Timor-Leste food systems to healthier, more sustainable ones. So as one example of the analysis part of the work, I mentioned that food trade plays an important role in shaping food systems in the Pacific and their health outcomes. And so we've had to do quite a lot of work to improve the trade databases in order to do analyses of regional trade. For various reasons, trade to and between smaller islands and the rest of the world is difficult to track, partly because of the different political status of islands with respect to current and former colonial powers, which means that trade is sometimes listed as internal domestic movement rather than, trade in and out of a particular geography. But you'll see here that this is a sort of underneath here, a maps of the Pacific. And on the left-hand side that are the blocks of the main sources of food going into the Pacific. So if you look at Europe, the two thicker grey bands there, that's essentially France. And that's food going to French Polynesia and to New Caledonia. North America has some trade with some of its largely, former and current protectorates and colonies, but the biggest flows are from Australia to Fiji, largely, which very close sort of trading relationship, New Zealand and East and Southeast Asia, and those food flows are often of products that are in less demand within those regions, and in some cases are being sort of pushed out into the Pacific as a market that can absorb these highly refined carbohydrates, cheaper, fattier cuts of meat, the infamous turkey tails and mutton flaps and things like this. And so these are the things that are driving the diet problem. So understanding where food is coming from, where it's going, how much of it, and what type of food it is core to understanding how to transform this food system. So one of the positive steps that we're trying to take is to recognize and support and strengthen what we're calling social platforms to support traditional food systems. So in this picture is a traditional market on the island of Malaita in the Solomon Islands, where inland or upland populations meet coastal populations and trade products. So the upland populations are trading taro and yam and vegetables and fruits with the coastal populations who are trading fish and shellfish. And these kinds of informal traditional market and exchange systems are really important. If people are getting food from this kind of food environment, it tends to be healthier, it tends to be supportive of a diverse and sustainable and nutritious diet. So to counter the kind of negative food system transitions we've been talking about, it's important to celebrate and advocate for indigenous foods and nutrition, to support traditional food markets like this as crucial to nutrition security, and to strengthen traditional community resource management. At a sort of more technological level, we can improve food safety, fish handling, and processing as a way of getting more nutritious food safely to more people. So one of the constraints of accessing fresh, nutrient-rich food in Solomons, for example, is the lack of an infrastructure, cold chain, for example, and food processing industry that can safely deliver products to consumers in remote areas. So we've been working with a number of local companies and communities on fish-based products. So fish powders that can be added to meals to make them more nutritious. Dried tuna jerky in one of those pictures, fermented fish dishes, oil preserved, small pelagics, domestic canning of tuna. These are the kinds of products that can help power village economies with aquatic foods. They can enable women to innovate at a pace and scale suitable to them. So solar freezers have made a big difference to fresh fish marketing and allow women to market fresh fish without having to worry about very short perishability times, and so they can modify their timetable for marketing to fit with their livelihoods. And building national programs that tailor services to this kind of industry, and enable innovation in food processing, handling, distribution. And, ensuring that all this is aligned with water, sanitation, and hygiene. So, joined up food systems thinking with a new product technology development lens. And part of food system thinking is also thinking about, who is involved in the food system actors. And a big part of this Island Food Systems program in Solomon Islands is training the next generation of island food system leaders. It's no good external experts coming in and providing advice. Domestic experts need to be recognized and assisted to provide the leadership for this food system transformation. And we're working with a local NGO called Custom Garden Association in Solomon Islands at an aquatic food innovation hub, which we've converted one of our old marine research stations to this broader aquatic food innovation hub, where leaders come, train, exchange ideas, and sharpen policies and programs, develop investment bids, and so on, to support the kinds of food systems that we've been talking about. And this works also by building durable strategic partnerships and capacity sharing models. So there's a relatively new Solomon Islands National University, which is growing and has a very innovative, forward-looking Center for Island Futures. So we've partnered with them to create these living laboratories for island food systems, do research for nourishing island food systems, and co-invest in outreach and dissemination of ideas, products, and services across. And, this program has just started, but there's already been 500 youth trained in living labs. And there's a National Island Futures alumni network. And there's already been influence over public discussion on island foods. So just to give a few examples also from the island food systems work we do in Timor-Leste. And there we work very closely in partnership with government to implement evidence-based policy. World Fish and the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries were involved in developing a national aquaculture development strategy, identifying areas that were suitable and unsuitable for aquaculture, and then developing a model for national aquaculture development. And this has been going a decade or so now, so it has some very promising results already. And so part of this work was in developing a public, private, and community partnership as a vehicle to develop aquaculture. So we didn't want this to be just another government or NGO project, but to be something that was embedded, financially viable, and community-driven and owned. And so these partnerships have allowed us to do that. And we wanted to take existing aquaculture, which was very small and very unproductive, and sustainably intensify it. So World Fish have an improved strain of tilapia that grows faster, is more climate resilient, more efficient at converting feed, resistant to some common diseases. So we introduced this alongside improved feeds and optimized stocking rates. And what we saw was an increase in pond productivity, tons per hectare per cycle, from around a ton per hectare per cycle back in 2010, before we started the existing small aquaculture systems, up to 17 tons per hectare per cycle. And we also doubled the number of cycles. So an enormous increase in productivity from these sort of technical improvements. And what that has meant in terms of outcomes is that the government policy in that aquaculture policy, which was about improving access to nutrient-dense foods, including aquatic foods, as a means to address real challenges in food security in Timor-Leste. So, 47% of children under 5 were stunted, and 23% of women of, working age are affected by anemia. And so the policy target was to increase national per capita fish consumption from a national average of around 6 kilograms per hectare per year, 6 kilograms per person per year, to 15 kilograms per person per year, so almost triple. And what we've seen is, if you look at the bottom diagram, that's the figures for 2011 on per capita consumption in 3 different environments. So in the non-coastal rural areas, it was only 4 kilograms per person per year, where much of Timor-Leste's population lives. In the urban areas, it was only 6. Only in coastal areas do people eat substantial quantities of fish, and that's mainly from wild capture fisheries. So clearly that fish is not getting inland to these inland farming-based populations and to urban populations. If you look 12 years later, 2024, 25, we've seen almost double in urban fish consumption, double non-coastal fish consumption, and roughly the same coastal fish consumption. So clearly this tilapia farming has reached a large quantity of the population and led to doubling of aquatic food consumption in populations that did not have access to this healthy, nutritious food before. The next stage will then be to look at what the health outcomes of that have been. One of the ways in which fish has been linked to health, developing early healthy diet habits, is through school feeding programs, ensuring that children, particularly those from lower income families, get access to nutritious food while they're at school. And if you look at many school feeding programs, they've often tried to get the cheapest food, and nutrition quality has sometimes been a real issue. In Timor-Leste, we've developed a decision support tool to help those providing school meals to source efficiently. And so locally produced fish can be supplied to schools either from fresh aquaculture, from marine capture fisheries, or from shelf-stable fish-based products like canned tuna and so on. And the model identifies the best procurement sources for each school in Timor-Leste based on times of transport, availability, and other factors. And so you could do this for any food commodity. So this is one of the ways in which island food systems research is helping improve island food system outcomes. So to summarize then, island food systems, we believe, have sufficiently distinct and shared characteristics to merit or deserve a special study and development strategy. And that's why we've developed this island food systems program. The transition to imported, processed, and unhealthy diets has been disastrous for island population health in the Pacific, certainly. I'll be very interested to hear whether the same stories is the case in the Western Indian Ocean. Sustainability transitions in island food systems are possible by building on indigenous and customary practice and modern advances in agronomy and aquaculture. While doing that, we also have to dismantle the remaining legacies of plantation economies and the worst aspects of globalization and the global trade in unhealthy food, and strengthen food sovereignty so people take charge of their diets and determine their own health. So practical projects of the type that I've given a few examples, often led or in partnership with island communities and or institutions like governments, schools, local NGOs, local civil society organizations. Those are needed to help to bridge the sort of concepts and technologies and policies of island food systems with implementable, viable practices on the ground that can be scaled, not to continental scales, but across islands and adapted to the diverse island systems that we see, the high islands, the low coral atolls, the large, highly populated, urbanized islands, the remote rural ones. So there's a lot of diversity to adapt to, and some things can be scaled more than others. But by balancing scaling with local applicability and working with local institutions at multiple levels, from the community, the individual household, to the national government and through regional organizations like SPC in the Pacific, Western Indian Ocean organizations there, CARICOM in the Caribbean. These island food systems can help to bring about transitions in the food, nutrition, diets, health, and sustainability of islands. I'll stop there and very happy to take questions and clarifications and to hear your experiences with the islands that you're familiar with. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Oh,
Eddie.
I wanted to end just by thanking the many people who've been involved in the work that I've shown. So our teams in Solomon Islands and in Timor-Leste, a collaboration between World Fish and others, both the scientists across from our headquarters in Penang in Malaysia and our country offices in these two countries, and all their partners in governments and NGOs and communities. I should mention one person, Hampus Eriksson, who is the lead of the Island Food Systems Program. And I'm more or less giving this talk on his behalf because he wasn't able to make it. But he would, I'm sure, want to share the credit with all the many people in these photos. And I hope if you follow the resources, you'll get to know some of them and their names and their work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eddie. It was a clear and inspiring presentation, so I'm sure there's some reaction in the participant. Maybe Amari, do you want to just you can speak if you want. There is someone holding the hand in the participant.
Thank you
Yeah,
very much. I mean,
go
if
for
it's
it.
possible, I have some questions if it's possible to ask.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the presentations. I mean, a lot of lessons I learned. First of all, I'm Amara Mesgabo and I'm a postdoctoral research fellow in University of Pretoria, South Africa, and I'm working on these sustainable food systems, particularly the blue food systems in aquaculture. So what I say is, I think it's a lot of parties participated to is transformative aquatic food systems, and what I want to learn is how was the contribution of the private sector to continue some of these project experiences, I mean the project activities, because sometimes, you know, when we try to intervene, the continuity or sustainability is a big problem. Sometimes policies is a challenge, or once we have policies, we may not have finance to continue such kind of initiatives unless the private sector participated and they work on that area. So I want to see how was the participation of the private sector in continuing this production. Thank you.
Yes, thanks very much. I mean, the principal private sector engagement investment in this case has largely been through very small firms and household level production. That's the private sector in most of the island settings that we've been working. There are larger scale actors present, buyers and others, and those and service providers of various kinds. And those there are also impact investors and who are seeking out, this kind of production system to support food system transitions. So there's a lot of this sort of blended finance, a mix of public and private finance. The way that the investments required have been quite small, and those have been in general underwritten through development projects initially. But a lot of care was taken, particularly in the Timor-Leste aquaculture project, to ensure that the investments are at a level that can be sustained without external funding. And the model that was developed for Timor-Leste has actually been picked up and is being scaled elsewhere because it's seen as, an ideal way to do this. So I think, financial analysis and linking to small scale credit, business advisory service, these kinds of things are a critical part of all of these sort of technical interventions. And that's really how it's been done here. It is a challenge. And one of the things that we see is that, sometimes people have been hit by repeated, like, extreme climate events. We work with seaweed farmers in Solomon Islands who have had their businesses destroyed 2 or 3 times from extreme events. And yet they've reinvested, sometimes with government support, sometimes with the support of their buyers, to reestablish, existing market chains. But yeah, it is a challenge, but I think there are various models for overcoming it, and so far we've tried to use those small scale finance mixed with public finance to support these innovations.
There is another question in the chat. Thank you, Eddie. Asking why island for your choice presentation? Are island involved in cultivating crops too? You may mention the cultivating taro. If you can answer that.
Sorry, is that in the chat? I didn't quite
Yeah,
understand the question.
maybe Felicia, you can say your question out loud. I don't know if she can hear us.
If I think I interpreted the question right, I focused mostly on aquatic foods, but yes, taro cultivation is something that we support. Custom Garden Association that we're working with is very supportive of taro cultivation, and also improved sweet potato varieties and other roots and tubers that are vital to Pacific Island food systems. I don't know the importance of these in the Western Indian Ocean food systems. There's another question. I don't know if that answered the question, but
Yeah, go ahead.
so
maybe it's for the one that haven't read the question. The question is, what is the role of insects farming in island to improve aquaculture feed? Do you have any work on this?
Yes, we do. Not so much in the existing programs that we've had. We do quite a lot on black soldier fly larvae cultivation elsewhere. I'm not aware that we've done it in Timor-Leste or Solomon Islands, but we do a lot in Malaysia, in Myanmar, in various sub-Saharan African countries that we work. And at the moment, it's still more expensive than pelleted feeds to run a successful insect farming operation, largely for livestock and aquaculture feeds rather than for direct human consumption. But yes, this is an area of innovation that we are involved in and could play an important role in islands, particularly in circular economy contexts where you're trying to use waste products efficiently, which is really important in especially urbanized small islands. So yeah, thank you.
Quentin, maybe you can ask your question too. Hello.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Edith. It was really inspiring, really nice what you're doing, guys. We were chatting with Patrice a bit, and we were wondering, how do you ensure that the time is fast enough? I mean, the transformation is fast enough between what you're implementing on, I don't know, do you change the food culture, the fact that they're eating new stuff that you're implementing aquaculture, and the changes operate quick enough before, I don't know, the entire system changes again?
Yeah, no, yeah, it is a good question. I think, yes, there is always, I think, a sense of urgency that is felt by funders, by researchers, analysts. That sense of urgency is not always experienced when we work on the ground, and getting change done can be a slow process. I think you have to move at the rate that people are able to move, and I think the structural changes that the rapid change could be aimed towards the higher level actors. I think the big structural changes in legislation, in policy, that is where the largest changes in the overall context can be made and need to be made. And there, I think, it is about gathering the evidence to make a convincing case that these transformed food systems are sufficient to nourish the populations that they have to nourish. I think it's not a case of banning, all imports, but their imports are still going to be needed. But there is a case of perhaps, more actively encouraging the imports of healthy foods. I didn't include it as a slide, but there has been a massive shift in the last 20 to 30 years in the Pacific in what previously was the import of quite healthy foods to supplement domestic production, to the import of almost exclusively unhealthy foods. So there's clearly a sort of policy intervention that could be made there to make it more difficult to offload unhealthy foods into the Pacific and to, shift the food system to a healthier trajectory, while the slower business of transforming food cultures, building productive domestic agriculture takes place.
Thank you. Thank you. I had eventually another question if no one raises their hand. It was more looking at aquaculture, because the few examples I have, like in the French Polynesia, for example, often there's aquaculture developed and work because the government are still funding them. And as soon as the government stop funding them, they're not autonomous enough. And usually a few years later, it just stops producing anything anymore. And I was wondering if you had some real success story where everything becomes independent of states' fundings.
Yeah, I mean, I think it might be a little early to tell that in terms of, I mean, certainly we do have examples from elsewhere. So, for example, in Bangladesh, where aquaculture started as being heavily government funded, largely failed. The private sector was then able to find ways to make it pay, and it's grown enormously since. And there's no direct government financing in aquaculture. What's often needed is public finance to de-risk to work out all the stuff that we worked out, for example, in Timor-Leste. What's the optimal stocking density? How fast can they grow? What are the distribution networks? What does a viable hatchery look like? All these kinds of things that if you can't find a private sector investor, then public money can overcome those initial barriers that may make the private investment fail at those early stages. But aquaculture in Timor-Leste is self-sustaining. It doesn't have like government financing. So the model that was developed there was for self-sustaining systems. There was some private investment and some public investment, but the farms themselves, the 800 and something farmers that have been reached, sorry, I didn't include that slide either, all have self-sustaining businesses without government finance.
Just to understand, Eddie, is it small scale farm or is it
Yeah.
like big? Okay, like there is
Yeah.
many different producer with small scale.
Yeah, so there's 838 farms, most of which have one or two small ponds. So they're all small scale. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. There's a question from Aaron. If you want to speak, Aaron. There was a question. Just wait a second.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, sorry. Eddie, really enjoyed I really enjoyed your talk. And one question that I had that was linked in a way slightly to the previous question was that many of these islands are regions of very high endemicity. And I was just wondering, either with the world of the work of World Fish or some of the other work that has been done, has there been any local innovation that has kind of made use of their own native species as part of an aquaculture program, specifically in the South Pacific? I mean, a lot of that happens in South Asia and parts of Southeast Asia, but I'm really interested in those island areas which are pretty fragile when it comes to some of these ecosystem challenges, particularly with invasives. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question, Aaron, and I'm glad you asked it because one of the things I had to leave out was a project I lead, which is on indigenous and nature-based aquaculture in Solomon Islands. And this is we're trying to move in this direction because the discussion has been always introduce tilapia, and that will probably happen in the Solomon Islands. It's been introduced before and it's not been very successful, but they've not had a sort of modern productive strain, which Timor-Leste did get and successfully. I should stress that these are non-breeding populations that are brought in. They can't reproduce in the wild. I mean, there have been a lot of problems with invasives, but we have a very tight biosecurity program, and we don't ship the fish unless the host country can meet the conditions as well. So yes, we're very conscious of that, and also of the potential for indigenous forms of aquaculture. So we did a survey around the Solomon Islands to try and find out, well, if there isn't commercial aquaculture, what is there? Even nascent forms of aquaculture, such as habitat improvement or ranching or on-growing fattening, etc. And there are a lot of these kinds of activities of doing things like altering the water flow between freshwater and seawater in lagoon mouths by managing the opening of the lagoon mouth. On Dai Island, just north of Malaita in Solomon Islands, there's a system of milkfish, indigenous milkfish cultivation, which involves taking the larvae from drying sort of pools in a mangrove area where they would die naturally if they were just left where they were. They're stranded populations, essentially, and moving them into freshwater lakes, which have no predators in them, and then just growing them on. So that's a very sustainable, very low input system. It's also very low productivity, but there are many examples of that of those kinds of systems, I think. Crab fattening. Seaweed farming is the one thing that has scaled somewhat in Solomon Islands in terms of indigenous marine aquaculture, autonomous marine aquaculture, very little external intervention. But it's focused on imported species, Capophycus species, and it's for not a food market, but for a global food additives market, carrageenan. So it's exported to China and processed there. There is, however, a small sea grape, another type of seaweed, sea grape farming industry that's developed. That's around an indigenous species of seaweed. So there are examples, yes. And what we're trying to do through this project, which is called Climate Adaptive Inclusive Nature-Based Aquaculture, or CAINA. It's an IDRC funded project, and I lead it. And in Solomon Islands, it's co-led with my colleague Dakin Harahau, and we're trying to champion and support these forms of aquaculture, so it doesn't just become tilapia is the answer. Tilapia is helpful and part of the solution, but not the only one. And yes, absolutely right. We should be looking to the rich indigenous resources, both in terrestrial and marine agriculture, for
Thank you very much.
strengthening these systems.
Yeah. I just is it okay if I ask another question, Camille?
Yeah, maybe one last question, because we have over time. And there's just a question in the chat about biosecurity. So maybe ask your question, Aaron, and if you can have a look, Eddie, and then we'll finish the webinar. Thank you.
No, with some of these examples that you had, from Timor-Leste and Solomons, was there any effort to scale up capacity development across the region? Using some of their own technologies at the local level, but then expanding it to network and societal or broader regional levels. And I just wanted to know if you'll have attempted something like that.
Yeah, sort of like technology transfer from one place to another. I know that there are examples, but I can't bring them immediately to mind. I will ask my colleagues from Solomons and Timor-Leste, and drop me an email, and I'll send back the response, and maybe post it if there's somewhere I can post it, so that other people also get that answer. So I think it's an important question. And my apologies, I don't have an example to hand, but I am aware that there are some. Yes.
Thanks very much.
But that's a good point. Yes. I mean, I think an important part of innovation is to spread local innovation. I know that we're interested in the milkfish, the Dai Island milkfish case, to see whether that might be used elsewhere, and that's one we're certainly keeping an eye on. But that's too early stage to fulfill your criteria.
Just one last question about is there any focus on aquatic biosecurity? Yep.
Yes, I think that's a key part of the whole island food systems work, and why there is an increasing emphasis on indigenous crops, and limiting the transfer of material from outside. I mean, you all know the history of invasions on islands, and so biosecurity is integral. And we have to balance the judicious import of productive crops that are in demand with the development of indigenous genetic resources. This relates to the time question that was asked earlier. Bringing indigenous resources into modern production systems and scaling and improving their productivity, so they play a larger role and feed a larger population that we have now, takes decades. And that's why things get introduced, because the work has already been done on, improved orange flesh sweet potato or improved tilapia and so on. Decades of research, millions of dollars of investment have gone into those products already, which is why people tend to reach for them first. But you're absolutely right. We should pay attention to the indigenous genetic resources and find ways to invest in those and minimize this continued cycle of importing things which sometimes are harmful. So thanks very much. Thanks for an excellent set of questions that have really made me think. I shall go back to colleagues and we'll have discussions about this. Thank you.
That's amazing. So thanks again for your participation, Eddie, and thanks all for your question and following the webinar. And please note that there won't be any webinar in August because it's summer holidays or holidays. And we'll be back on Tuesday, September the 8th at the same time for a session on co-construction and dialogue with stakeholders. So please connect in September. And thanks everyone again. Thank you.
Thank you.
See ya.